What single thing has an impact on every single system on the body? What single thing? There's a few things, for sure. Absolutely, there's a few things. But the one we're talking about today is breathing. Now, breathing is something that gets a wild rep in the fitness industry. I'm not talking about voodoo breathing. I'm not talking about zone 2 running here. This podcast is going to be predominantly about how breathing influences all the different systems of the body, but we're going to focus on functional anatomy, positions of the bones, how the breathing can manipulate your mobility, and things like that, how it can really be used to understand the body. So we're going to use breathing as that lens. Now, for me, throughout my career, I would say breathing, when I first hear about breathing, I'm always thinking yoga vibes, Usa, this kind of stuff. Breathing in through the nose, chilled out. And when I first started lifting in the gym, the biggest application of breathing would have been the brace for a heavy squat, a heavy deadlift. Breathe into the belt, you'll probably hear that a lot. Breathe into your belly to create higher intra-abdominal pressure, this kind of vibe. That was the first influence of breathing I heard. And then a few years into my career, I went to do an internship in Munich at this MTMT gym. And they started talking about breathing as a way to improve mobility, improve positions. And at first I was like, what? Even spoke to a few of the clients there and they were like, yeah, we don't like the breathing stuff. And I was like, yeah, I didn't really understand it. And I think those clients didn't understand it either. And it's something that's kind of it's not very well known. This breathing influence on the position of the bones and the body in general. So I was a bit skeptical at first when I heard these guys all talking about breathing. They would always start their sessions with their clients with getting them in different positions, lying on the ground particularly, and getting them to do a few breathing exercises. And I was like, guys, what's going on here? Why is everybody just lying on the ground and breathing? And during my time there, I still didn't fully understand it. Did some of David Gray's stuff, but again, still didn't really understand the influence of breathing on the body, because I feel like it's still a bit rogue when you're like, how is breathing going to change anything with regards to my mobility? And why are you even talking about bones with regards to my mobility? Surely my mobility is all down to the length of my muscles, how long my muscles are. If my hamstrings are longer, when I go down to touch my toes, surely I can get further down. But the more you look into mobility training, for things in particular like the side splits, the orientation of your pelvis is fundamental. The position of your pelvis, the bones, is fundamental to achieving that position. So bones have a dramatic influence on everything, particularly mobility and the muscles that are going to react. So the position of the bones in the body will dictate the function of the muscles around those bones. That will make more sense throughout this talk, throughout this little pod. But that was just a bit of me. I was skeptical at first. So you might be just started listening to this podcast and what is Jacob on about? He's talking about breathing. How is that going to have any influence on anything? I've never heard about it influencing the shape and position of our bones, of our body. That's new to me. It was new to me as well, and I was super skeptical until I watched a YouTube video. YouTube is like the modern Library of Alexandria, which I just found out yesterday wasn't that big a deal. But that's a story for another time. But I first watched a video on YouTube on the PRI, Postural Restoration Institute. The main guy from there did a talk for strength and conditioning coaches, and I saw him use breathing, getting up on a table and got the strength and conditioning coach who was very in an extended position. Just think big chest, wide shoulders, almost like his chest is falling forward, that kind of position. And he was missing a bunch of normal ranges of motion at different parts of his body. And basically the PRI guy got him up on a bed and measured his joint angles. So you might see a physio, you might have been to a physio and they might measure your joint angles, like test your internal, external rotation at the hips. Basically, you lie on your back, bring your knee up, and they'll rotate your lower leg side to side. And what you're looking for there is a specific range of motion at each joint. And basically, this guy was missing a lot of range of motion with the internal, external rotation. And I think he had 0 abduction on one side. So basically, his leg couldn't abduct in towards his midline. So he was missing a few movement options. And when I say missing, there's like a human normal, which you need to walk normally and have a full range of motion at different joints. And those are kind of written down in a lot of physiotherapy textbooks of like, if you have this range of motion, it's kind of normal. More than this, it's hypermobile. And less than this, you're a bit more immobile at that particular range. And none of this is good or bad. It's just the outcome. It's just your body's strategy for coping with the tasks that you give it. So for example, this strength and conditioning coach had clearly been doing a lot of back squats, heavy deadlifts. He was driven into this chest up, shoulders back extension position. And because of that, he'd lost some movement options. Again, so like this is a bit like rogue. What am I talking about? Movement options. I'm talking about the degrees of movement available at each joint. That is your movement options. Okay. Easiest way to think about it is, or a way to think about it is like, say you straighten your arm. If you can come back and touch your hand to your shoulder, it would seem as though you've got like a full movement option at the elbow there. You can flex your arm fully. If you could only get halfway, you've got half of your available movement options. It's like a dumb way to talk about it, but that happens at every joint. It's just obvious to see at the elbow because it's there and it's visible. It's less obvious to see at the hip because, well, you'd have to lie someone down and understand how to actually measure it. But just moving on, that's movement options, just to give you a little idea. And basically this guy measured his movement options, got him to do some breathing drills, and helped him regain all of his movement options. So effectively, his hip and his femur weren't moving. His leg was not moving through a particular test. He got him to do some breathing drills, and then he could access that range again, which absolutely blew my mind. You kind of have to see it to experience it. So they just search PRI, strength and conditioning coach, and it will come up. Excuse me. And I was like, wow, that actually makes sense. So how is he doing this? Like, what is actually going on there? And when you breathe in and you breathe out, naturally things in your body are going to change. It's all about pressure management. It's your body system to manage pressure in the body. So when you inhale, your body effectively grows in space. It moves into the world a bit more. It expands out. It externally rotates across the board. I could go through every single bone in the body, but you can just do it. Inhale, and you might feel that your chest gets bigger, your ribs expand. Effectively, your bones move away from the midline to decrease the pressure inside of your body relative to outside of your body so air can flow in. And the bones move to achieve that. The bones will move. And then naturally, if you get the bones moving, that's going to have a consequence of the different joint angles that you have available to you. Now, this is kind of obvious when you talk about it, but it's missed. Not many people think like, so if I inhale, my ribs will move. Normally you think when I inhale, air goes into my lungs, and that's kind of the end of the thought. But in reality, when you inhale, there's so many. I'll just run you through a couple things that happen at the bones. Well, your ribs will externally rotate as you inhale, so just think expanding away. At the pelvis, you'll counternutate the sacrum, and your pelvis kind of opens up almost like a flower flowering as your sacrum moves back and opens up to receive the guts. The guts come in, and then more air is able to flow into that lower pressurized diaphragm and into the lungs. The scapula will elevate, abduct, protract, and upwardly rotate. Just think they'll go up and out, again, to create more room for the diaphragm, for the lungs, to create that lower pressure spot. It's all about creating a pressure change, a gradient change to enable air to come into the body. And that's just a brilliant way for the body to be designed. I always remember Angus Bradley and Pat Davidson talking about the evolution of species. And when the first thing that we were able to do as a bacteria, the first living, breathing thing was a bacteria, and it could do two things. It could expand and it could compress. It could respire. And then naturally we've evolved from that. If you believe in the theory of evolution, naturally we've evolved from that. So that's still the foundation of our movement. And every single bone that we've built on top of it, on top of that bacteria, through the years of evolution, always has this number one respiration in mind, because naturally that we need that to live. So we are designed to breathe, and through our day-to-day movements, whatever we put on our body, the tasks that we ask our body to do, we will get different outcomes, and we will have a different strategy to get through life in a manageable way. But it's not just that the bones around the diaphragm that move. Also, just think like when you yawn in the morning, that's an inhalation strategy. You send your arms away from you, you do a big stretch. This enables you to get loads of air in. Your arms externally rotate. Everything moves away from the midline when you're inhaling. You've got other movement things that are associated with this. Pronation of the foot is associated with exhalation. Supination of the foot associated with inhalation. And this is just a little bit of a chat about how the bones will move to create a different pressure system in your body to enable air to come in. And just this thought process, like to go down this thought process, I don't know if it's common in medical science or things like that, but I'd never come across it. It was absolutely fascinating to me. And then you kind of fall into this trap. I fell into this trap. It was like, all right, everyone's got to work on this breathing. But some people don't like that. Some people are very skeptical. They're like, why am I breathing? I'm here to lift weights. I'm here to get strong. Why would I lift weights? Why would I be breathing? Why would I be there breathing when I'm here to lift weights? And the reality is, this path of learning about the bones and breathing, the benefit is not the actual breathing exercises. It's a deeper understanding of functional anatomy that you'll need to know for these different inhalation and exhalation strategies that your body has, and the movements associated with those. So once you understand those, you'll have a better understanding of the human body, and you can start to organize your exercise choices for your individual clients or for yourself based on the strategies that human in front of you has. If they're an exhalation biased human being, you might set them up with exercises that will give them more internal rotation, for example. These are the kind of things that you can be working your way through and understanding, and why this breathing lens is so, in my opinion, foundational to a lot of people's understanding of the human body and functional anatomy. You get a better understanding of how mobility works, how the position of the skeleton is extremely important for the actions of the muscles. But I can see why people would be skeptical, and it's a good thing to be skeptical, because the more I learned about this, the more I understood that breathing sometimes isn't enough to change people's range of motion. Now, there's different ideas here. David Gray talks about not fighting tension with tension. So if you have a lot of tension, it's likely that you have a limited range of motion. And in order to regain that range of motion, you might need to relax into it. But I've heard other people, such as Jordan Shallow, the muscle doc, talking about you need to use, and Jamie Smith from Melbourne Strength Culture. They've both talked to me, not to me directly, but I've heard them talk about pushing sets hard through new ranges in order to regain that range of motion. And this is more of a conversation about center of mass. So to give you an example, one of these breathing drills is you lie on your back with your arms out in front of you and you do a little posterior tilt of the pelvis. And then you do some deep inhales and exhales in there, getting all the air out of your body, and then doing a gentle refill. Jordan Shallow's argument is, well, if you've been lifting for 20 years and can squat and bench and deadlift huge numbers, that won't be sufficient to change the structure of your bones because the muscles are too big and they're too strong and you're too compressed. So when you're lying on your back, naturally the gravity pulls everything down, so the backside of your ribcage will expand. Just think, you're lying on your back, your guts, your heart, everything falls to the back of the ribcage and allows that to expand a little bit more. Jordan's point was, well, just put them on a chest-supported row, load it up, and just stretch the arms out, and then naturally the backside of the ribcage will get a huge stretch, and hopefully breathing in there will enable you to expand if you've got a very, very strong individual. Now, David Gray would talk about not fighting tension with tension, so there's two different sides to this. Which one works better? I'm still finding that out. I don't know. I think, but you can get better buy-in with using that heavier weight to pull someone into a different position during some movements. But another reason why this is so valuable is shoulders are something that just take a beating generally. If you've lifted for a long time, it's probably pretty likely that your shoulders will take some kind of you'll have some kind of shoulder issue at some point. That's just the harsh reality. And the shoulder is complex because there's a lot of bones involved with the movement of the shoulder. Scapula, the clavicle, the rib cage, your humerus. There's a lot of bones, a lot of muscles, small muscles. Rotator cuff takes a big hit for the being the problem child. But the reality is, sorry for interrupting the pod. I'm just here to advertise the programs. A couple programs in the link in the bio, in the link tree. Hypertrophy program if you want to get jacked out of your nut, and the fundamentals program if you're a bit bored of your training, you want to mix it up, you're fed up of just lifting weights in the gym and you want to come a little bit more athletic. Dive in to the link tree and get involved now. It's often to do with this relationship between the scapula and the rib cage, between all of those bones. But the rib cage, it needs to be in a position that enables the scapula to move along it nicely. This is why you get winging. If you just bench press and drive your shoulders back and down, and that's your only strategy to lift, shoulders back and down, chest up, just things like back squats, well then naturally the backside of your rib cage, if you're driving your chest forward, is going to be compressed because the pressure, you're sending your bones forward. Something's got to move for that to enable, and it's the backside of the rib cage will drive forward to enable the front side of the rib cage to drive forward. And then you've got a flatter backside of the rib cage. The scapula's got nothing to glide along. You're going to get winging, scapular wing. There's going to be a gap between the scapula and the rib cage because it's so pushed far forward, and potentially you might have some consequences because of that. That's something that I've been going through recently, and gaining expansion on the backside of the rib cage has been something I've been pursuing and trying to regain that relationship between the scapula and the rib cage by doing certain movements where I push my rib cage back, send my center of mass back, and get my scapula moving through a nice full range of motion to help regain that ability for those two bones to work together and the muscles acting upon them to work together in harmony. And going down this breathing lens, you'll get an understanding of how these bones interact. So there's a lot of benefits to going down that. Even if you're skeptical at the start, you're like, I'm just breathing. What the hell am I doing? Nothing's happening. Well, it's an opportunity for you to learn more about the body, more about functional anatomy and where you can take it. I was skeptical at the start too. Bring that skepticism. It's brilliant. But if you want to ever, like, you can really have a big impact on people, because some people will say they've never touched their toes. And the reality is that's probably because they're missing a bit of flexion or external rotation at some point during the spine. Getting them to lie on their back and do a few breathing exercises, they'll then be able to flex their system significantly better, and they'll be able to touch their toes. So you can have like instant changes in mobility doing this kind of thing. Also, understanding the pressure, the influence of breath on pressure is huge for bracing in powerlifting, or just when you're lifting heavy, because you want to create a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, and this will give you the best technique, because effectively what we learn, what I've just kind of talked about, is when you inhale, the space gets bigger around your body, so we create a lower pressure level in the diaphragm, so more air can come in. When you exhale, that space gets smaller. Do a long exhale, all the air comes out, ribs come down and in, and the space inside, the pressure gets higher and it's smaller. That's what we want actually when we're lifting heavy weights. You've got a lot of space in your axial skeleton, in your torso, everything that's not your arms and your legs effectively. You've got a lot of space in there, free space. Using breathing can make that space smaller. To do a long exhale, keep the muscles on that create that exhale. So keep your abs on, lats on a little bit, and then breathe into that smaller space, keeping it small. You've just created a container full of pressure that then you'll get way more work out of your active tissues, out of those bigger tissues, just from creating this better bracing strategy, rather than breathing into this belly, breathing into this bigger space. It's much more effective to breathe into a smaller space. So there's loads of kind of attributes that you can get from going through this breathing lens. Yes. So a couple things I'll just go over again. So breathing is biphasic. There's two phases: expansion, compression, inhalation, exhalation. So things associated with exhalation, you have internal rotation of the ribs, of every single bone in the body, adduction, things moving towards the body, extension, think jumping patterns. We're extending at the hips come forward. Dorsiflexion, pronation, the bones in the foot going towards the ground. Concentric, overcoming force production. Stance, part of the gait cycle, which we'll dive in a future episode. And then we have inhalation, which is more expansion, external rotation, abduction. Just think your bones getting abducted away from your midline by an alien. Flexion, so you're flexing the spine, just thinking like getting into the fetal position. All of those strategies are inhalation based. Supination and yielding, absorbing force. So these are all the movements associated, biased. Now you're always doing all of these movements, but it's just a bias when you inhalation or exhalating. That's not the right word. Exhaling or inhaling. That's the right word. Yes. So this was like a little rundown on breathing. And a big part of my movement model is breathing and gait and their applications for humans in the weight room, in sports performance, in movement options, in strategies for moving. Why? Because it's based on evolution. It's based on a more complete model than just like these individual things, individual movement options in this dead body anatomy that we learn on our basic, like level 3 or basic textbooks when we first become a personal trainer or whatever, or a coach. Whereas gait and breathing is something that we've evolved for years to do. Not so much. We haven't evolved for years to bench press. So sometimes bench pressing has consequences, and this lens can help you get out of those new strategies. So breathing affects every system, has a lot of influence on how we move, how we function, the muscles, getting a lot of muscles. So another little quick one is like, if you have the ability to move someone's bones, get them in a better strategic position for lifting, say a more rounded rib cage, the lats attached to the rib cage, they wrap around the rib cage. If you've got a bigger set of ribs on the backside and a more expanded, fully expanded rib cage on the backside, you're going to get a better lat contraction when you train back. There's loads of benefits to this. Sneak.